You mentioned Kelly Thurman. Tell us a little bit about maybe him and some of the memorable people at Eastern in those days. I've heard several people have had very warm memories of Kelly and the kind of leader he was.
Yes, and I share those warm memories of Kelly. He was a fine man. He was a Southern gentleman, and he took particular interest in his younger faculty. He became something of a father figure to us, and there were quite a few of us in those days because the university was growing quite rapidly, so there was a lot of new faculty that came on board. And Kelly was sure to take us under his wing, treat us well. So I always remember him as chair, and he became something of a model for me when I became chair, and what was the kind of relationship that you should have or to have with faculty, particularly new faculty. I have good memories of Glenn.
What about memories of Dean Ogden?
I have really fond memories of Dean Ogden. Of course, I met him and his wife Jay both when I interviewed here. I saw him on numerous occasions at various social functions, at performances, either theater or music performances. Like Kelly Thurman, he was very much the gentleman. He was very, very kind. But he always had expectations,
Yeah.
And you knew you didn't want to disappoint those expectations. And you didn't want to disappoint them, both because you didn't want to get in trouble, but also because you didn't want to disappoint Dean Ogden, a very kindly fellow. I always remember he had a habit of looking at you over. He wore these half glasses, Whenever I think of Dean Ogden, I always think of him, looking at you over those half glasses. And I remember when I became dean, I got a lovely note from Dean Ogden, because he was Dean of Arts and Sciences. And he was the last Dean of Arts and Sciences. And
the
then
one and only we used to.
Yeah, about 20 years later, I became the so-called first Dean, of the newly formed Arts and Sciences. So we had something of a bond. And one moment I've always remember, I believe it was at, it may have been at Dr. Custer's installation as president, and he was invited back to participate in that. And he and I kind of walked down the procession together. That was kind of a special moment.
Yeah.
I liked him. Yeah.
Of course, when you became dean, there were a lot more people, I guess, to keep track of than when Dean Ogden was dean.
I think so. I think so. I'm not really sure of that. Of course, it was a fairly large college of arts and sciences when Dean Ogden had it. May have been somewhat larger when I became dean.
Well, we're now up to the Hanley Funderburk period, and I just wonder that he came here, I think, in 1985 and stayed until the late 90s. What kind of memories do you have of the Funderburk era, if any?
Well, I remember we went through some very difficult financial times under the Funderburk era, and I think that one of his principal contributions to the university was getting us through that era. And one of the issues that he particularly addressed were faculty salaries. Salaries were low in comparison to other institutions, in comparison to our peer institutions. And he worked very hard at bringing those salaries up and did manage to bring them up. He had a reputation for being a very tight fellow with the buck, but he had his reasons for being that. He also had a reputation for being something of a distant fellow. Like that, he hearkened back to the Martin years, and I think there was something a little bit, perhaps, hierarchical. I wouldn't say autocratic, but hierarchical about him. He wasn't the most approachable fellow. But I got along with him well, and I always, again, with him, I remember particularly a moment, and this was during President Custer's inauguration, and President Funderburk was here. I think was out in the ravine, as I recall.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw him there, and he was standing up in the ravine. He was kind of by himself. And so I just went over to him and just to say hello, which was something that I would never have done, while he was actually president, and was a little bit leery about doing even then. He had that kind of aura about him. But I went over to him, and I struck up a conversation with him. And what we wound up talking about were grandchildren and soccer games.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a delightful conversation, and it was a nice glimpse of the human side of the man that I think we didn't get to see enough of when he was president.